Well, hey there everyone. So this week and next week we're going to be doing something a little bit special. So I've been doing my Bridgerton rewatch because season 3 is coming. The first part in like May 16th, I think. And so I pretty much wanted to make a Bridgerton dress, which is an empire waist style dress. But I am going to be splitting it into 2 parts because there's a lot that I wanted to sew for this, because I wanted to make the undergarments as well as the outer dress. So this week is going to be just the undergarments, so the shift and the corset, and then next week is going to be the outer gown. So I'm kind of like a week off because I'll get done with this and there will be like an extra week and then Bridgerton comes out. But I really want to do this now and I couldn't think of anything else that I wanted to do. So we're going to be doing that, and we're just going to be ahead of the game before Bridgerton comes out. So let me explain what we're doing. So for the shift, I decided to use, I was looking at some like inspiration photos of a shift and what I could put under this, and pretty much I happened upon, so the pattern that I'm going to be using for the outer dress is one that I previously bought. It was, I'll put it up somewhere. It's a McCall pattern, and it's for an empire waist kind of gown. And I think it's actually like a recreation of Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies dresses, which is an empire waist. So that's the kind of dress I'm going to be using because that's the same style that they use in Bridgerton. But I was looking at what to do for the shift because there's a lot. It's a very small up top and you don't want it to be seen, so you can't do like the regular poofy arm shift like you see me do with corsets. I happened upon a few images that gave me the idea, so I'm going to use that same pattern for the shift, but I'm gonna adjust it a little bit. So again, I don't want the shift to be seen, so I'm going to take this bodice pattern and I'm going to lower it down a little bit so that it doesn't pop up when I have the outer dress on, and I'm also going to lower the back. And then instead of doing a lining, I'm going to do facing because I don't feel like dealing with a lining, so I'm going to do facing for this top. So that means I have to retrace the bodice patterns with the changes that I wanted, and then also trace a facing, which you'll see me do. So I'm going to do a facing for both the back, arms, and the neckline. And then we'll get into the corset a little bit. We're just going to stick with the shift for now. So after I cut out or readjust all of those patterns and then cut out all of the material, I will see you back in a little bit. So to make the armhole facing, what I did is I put together all of these bodice pieces, and then I put the parchment on top and traced out the shape for the facing. Then to adjust the bodice piece for the front, I put parchment over it and I just lowered the top and then made everything else the same. Then from there I could trace the facing for the front bodice piece. And then next I would do the same to the back bodice piece, where I will lower the back line, neckline, and then put parchment over it and trace out the facing for that. Alright, now that everything is cut out, it is time to start sewing things together. So the first thing that I need to do is put the darts into the front bodice. I'm going to go ahead and sew the side back pieces to the middle back pieces, and then sew that to the sides of the front bodice. And then from there, I know I'm supposed to add the facing after I've sewn like the arms together and everything, but I really kind of wanted to sew the facing on before then, because then I don't have to deal with if the circles match up and if the sizing is right. So this way I could literally just pin it to it and then sew it, and then once everything's adjusted, I can sew the arms together and it'll be fine. So I'm going to start with the armhole facing, so that just gets sewn straight on to the armhole, and then I'm also going to finish all of these edges because the seams will be exposed. So I'm going to zigzag all the seams and then the edge of the facing. So once I zigzag the edge of that facing, I'm just going to iron it in, and then do the same thing for the neckline and the back of this bodice. So I'm going to see you after that. Now again, the first thing that I have to do is I have to put the 2 dart pieces into the front bodice piece. And then from there I can sew the side back piece onto the middle back piece. And again, I will be serging all of these edges. Then the back piece gets sewn on to the front bodice piece. Now for the facing, I'm just going to take the armhole facings for now, and I'm going to pin them to the armhole before I sew these straps together. Once I've sewn that on, I'm going to unfold it and serge the edge of this so that it doesn't fray. And then make sure you clip all of the curved edges, and then you can turn it and iron it. And then to keep the facing down a little bit, I just stitched the ditch in some of these seams to make them stay. The same is done with the neck facing. You just pin it straight to the front of the bodice, and then you sew it, serge the edge, turn it over after clipping the edges, and iron it. And lastly, do the same to the 2 back bodice pieces. So now that the facing is added, it's time to sew the arms together at the shoulder. Okay, so once everything is sewn together at the shoulder, I go ahead, I trim the excess and then zigzag the edge of that as well. And then I can go ahead and fold in the 2 back sides for the buttonholes. So I did fold it in quite a bit just because I needed it to be a little bit smaller, but I'm not going to make it all the way tight because again, this is a shift, so it doesn't really need to be tight like the outer dress will. So I just folded them in about this much for the buttonholes, so then we can move on to the skirt. So I'm going to see you after that. And then the bodice gets sewn together at the arms. Now I can go ahead and fold in the edges for the buttonholes at the back of this bodice. Now for the skirt, so I did have to go and pick up another bed sheet because I did not have enough of my stash of white bed sheets apparently. So after I did that, I could go ahead and start on the skirt. So basically the construction of the skirt, if you're looking at other dresses in that era, you'll see that the front doesn't have any ruffles, but the back has all of the action. So that's pretty much what this skirt's going to be. So there's one panel for the front and two panels for the back. Now, since this is a shift, so for the back, there's little like cutouts, and that's where you're going to fold in a hem so that the back can like open and you can get the dress on easier. So normally you would put buttons there, but since this is a shift and I'm not really worried about anybody seeing inside, I'm just not even going to bother with adding any buttons or connectors to close up that little gap. So I'm just going to leave that like that and go ahead and just hem those two little sides. And then again, I will be zigzagging all of these edges because I do not want it to fray. So yeah, everything just gets sewn together, and then I can go ahead and add the bodice onto the skirt, right sides together. And then I can go ahead and hem it, and then this shift is almost done. So upon trying on the shift, it was a little gapey, which I was inclined to ignore because it's gonna be underneath things, but I just couldn't quite ignore it. So to do a little last stitch effort to fix gaping in the bodice is I added a little like elastic channel in between the facing and the outer layer of the front here, like just right here, and I just fed a little elastic through, and that just tightened up the bodice. So after that, then this shift was done and we can move on to the corset. As you can see here, the back of the skirt has the two little flaps, and those are going to be folded in twice to create the opening for the back. So you're just going to sew up until that point and then create those little hems. And again, I am serging all of the edges. And then this back skirt piece can be sewn onto the front skirt pieces at the two sides. And then I just put a basting stitch on the two back panels of the skirt, and then I will gather it to be the length of the bodice piece. Now the bodice piece gets connected to the skirt right sides together. And then I just go ahead and sew the buttonholes onto the back bodice piece. And to fix a bit of the gaping that I had for the front of this bodice, I sewed a little elastic channel, and then I'm just going to feed through a little elastic and sew it on each end, and that's going to gather the front just a teeny bit. I had to shorten this dress about an inch, so I just trimmed that and then I hemmed it. Okay, now for the corset. So I did purchase a pattern for this a while back. If you all remember when I did the reversible corset, one of the reversible corsets, I did purchase a pattern from this lovely person on Etsy, and that is a pattern that I'm going to be using today. So since I have made this pattern before, I knew that I needed to make a little bit of adjustments to make it fit just a little bit better, because if you remember when I did the other one, I had to gather the bodice here just a little bit just because it was gaping. So I'm going to, when I'm cutting out the pattern for the front bodice piece, which is on a fold, I'm just going to shorten it just a teensy bit on that fold part. And then when I'm making the little darts here, there's a big one and a small one. I'm just going to use both of the small ones just to make it fit a little bit better, because I just remember it was really gapey for me, and this is going to help adjust it. So I believe I used a curtain. I think this was either a curtain or a tablecloth from Goodwill. I bought this forever ago. And it's been in my stash for a while, and I finally get to use it. But I really wanted to use this material because it was stiff. I almost used a satin, but I really just didn't feel like dealing with the flimsiness of it. So I'm going to see you back after I cut out those few little pieces that I need for this and the interfacing for it. Now for this corset, you can see that I've shortened the front bodice piece just a little bit at the fold. Once I have everything cut out, I can go ahead and add the interfacing onto the outer bodice pieces. Now that everything's cut out, this is a pretty simple construction because there's only a few pieces. So the back gets sewn on to that massive front bodice piece on both ends. There's the two back pieces. And then once you do that, the arms are, or the little straps are also sewn on. So you do that for both the lining and the outer fabric. Also, before you sew the outer fabric, I also ironed the interfacing onto that. Just to make it a little bit stiffer and more structural. And now for the little booby darts. So if you go to the pattern, there is a very, very well instructed video tutorial on how to do those little darts. So I highly recommend you buy the pattern and check out their video. I'm not going to be the greatest at explaining it, so I highly recommend, if you're confused about it, to go check out their video in the pattern if you purchase it. But pretty much to my understanding, I'm going to try and explain it. So there's going to be the two darts on each side. So you basically make 2 incisions on each side of the bodice, which equals 4 incision cuts. And so you're going to take the little triangle, and after you've marked out your seam allowance and all the squares and whatnot, which you'll see me do, you line up the lines on one side. So I just did all 4 at once. And then you line up the lines using a pin. So if you stick the pin through one line and then stick it through the other line, you know that the lines match up. And then you just go ahead and sew it down the 4. And then I turn it to the back. This is very hard to explain. And then you take the little triangle pieces and you bring it through the back, you match up the other lines. This is so hard to explain. You'll kind of see how I do it, but again, if you want a more in-depth and better explanation, check out the pattern. And then you sew those lines together, and then you just poke in the little bottoms and then top stitch these things. So you'll see me do all that. Apologies, it's very hard to explain. So once I get that done on both the lining and the outer fabric, I'm gonna see you back here. Then the 2 back bodice pieces can be sewn onto the front bodice piece. And then the straps are placed right sides together on both the outer fabric and the lining. Now here's the complicated part for the little darts in the front. Again, if you do want to see a bit of a more in-depth and better explained tutorial, please check out the pattern that I have linked down in the description. So you can see me here, I'm using the pattern guide to mark out the lines that I need to make for the two little darts. So basically we're going to draw out a little rectangle, and then in between these little rectangles I'm going to cut a slice down the middle. But I'm not going to slice all the way down. I will stop just before the bottom, and then I will slice a little corner piece to each corner of this little rectangle. Now I'm going to take my dart pieces and just trace out the seam allowance for each of the pieces. And then right sides together, I'm going to line up each of these lines with a pin. It's easy if you just stick one through one side and then stick it through the other side and match up the lines that way. Then they will all get sewn down. And then you flip this to the back and then turn the little dart pieces to the other side, and then again match up those lines and sew down the line. And then lastly, once you have ironed all of these darts out, you will poke the little square down into the little dart piece and then top stitch the little triangles. Alright, so now that we have these two separate pieces, what you're supposed to do, but what I'm not gonna do, is you're supposed to place them right side or wrong side to wrong side, and then, like, you know, baste them together and then put a bias tape around the top and the arms, but I hate bias tape so I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna do a little half stitch effort. So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the outer fabric and the lining, and I'm gonna place it right sides together, and I'm gonna sew all the way around it and then just turn it right sides out so I don't have to deal with a bias tape. And then once I do that, I can go ahead and add my boning channels, and then I can add my boning, then I can add my bias tape to the bottom, and then I can add my grommets to the side and the arms. And then this bad boy is done, so I'll see you all in the final look. Now it's time to connect the outer bodice piece and the lining, so I'm just going to lay them right sides together and sew all the way around except for the bottom. Now I'm going to sew my bunny channels and my grommet channel. And then lastly, the garments get put in, and then we are ready for the final look. Alright, so here she is in all of her glory. So this fit remarkably well. The corset turned out incredible with the changes I made, and then the shift turned out really good too, especially with the little fix that I did here. I am very glad that I did use the pattern that I'm going to use for the outer gown for the shift, because now I know what I need to adjust. Like, I need to bring this bodice in just a little bit. I need to make the back here just a little bit tighter because it is pretty loose on the shift. So those little adjustments that I need to make, and I am also going to adjust the back skirt here, but I will explain that next week. But together these turned out really, really well. I am very, very happy with how these turned out. So yeah, if you want this pattern, I highly recommend you check it out. I will link it down in the description. And then this pattern you could probably get on Amazon or at Michael's or something. I'll probably link that down below as well. And again, this is not historically accurate, so if you're coming here for historically accurate things, you're going to be sorely disappointed. This is just my interpretation of what I would put underneath and of the corset and whatnot, so don't come at me with historical stuff because I know it's wrong, likely, especially like with elastic, and I used a machine, I didn't hand sew anything, so don't come at me with historically accurate stuff. But besides that, I think this is going to go very well underneath my gown. So yeah, I hope you come back next week to see the actual gown. I'm very excited for the materials that I have lying around. I think it's going to turn out really good, and it's making me more hyped for Bridgerton Season 3. So stick around and see this part 2. Hopefully it turns out well. So, anywho to do. If you like what I did, go and like and subscribe. I post most Saturdays, mostly at noon, and I will see you in my next video. Thank you for watching!